Okay,
This is
listeners,
T-Boy Swag with DJ Pissboy and
and Emmett Abrams, fourth year in the undergraduate animation and screenwriting program here at UCLA. Soon to be author of The Traitor, a time traveling trans tale, coming out from the Ulysses Press in late 2023. You can find me at Nylon Bandit on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also a jester professional. I went to clown school, and I'm not like actual clown school, but like in my head, I went to clown school. So that's how
that's what matters. That's what matters.
That's how I'm posing myself.
I feel like you need to I feel like clown school, it's like you can fake all degrees. Like I can believe that I went to Harvard and that's my degree at Harvard. I feel like clown school is part of that.
Yeah, exactly. Or like bird school. Like I feel like that's something that you can say, like, I went to bird school, which is for birds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bird law.
Bird law.
And what are we talking about today?
Oh man, what aren't we talking about?
We're talking about so many things.
Yeah. So last time I was here, I talked a little bit about reclamation of certain characters in animated media, which, I mean, I guess like this podcast is generally about like reclamation of certain figures by the trans community, like in general in media, like throughout all sorts of media. But like specifically, I was talking about animated characters. And I want to take this reclamation theme to live action, and specifically live action films that are very uber macho. And we're going to be looking at Jackass, the Jackass series a little bit. Hopefully we will be doing a follow-up because spoiler alert, I have never seen
Neither of us have seen Jackass.
Neither of us have seen Jackass.
This is the prequel episode towards our Jackass episode, which we've been talking about since last year.
Literally since last year, listeners. We fucked up. We fucked up. We did a no, which is we forgot to watch Jackass.
We forgot to watch Jackass, and Johnny Knoxville did not die in vain. We will climb that mountain soon.
I love the idea of Johnny Knoxville being dead when he is very much alive and like is on a Hulu series right now.
He was on WWE
and WWE.
He was on WWE's like world. What do they fucking call it? Like the big event. I almost called it the SmackDown, but like I don't think that's what it's called. But I saw that Johnny Knoxville, the big one, he was like fighting in that, and I really wanted to see it. But I forgot about it. But you best believe that we will be back to talk about Jackass. Who knows? We might host a watch party of Jackass somewhere. Virtual Twitch stream. But yeah, today we're talking about masculinity, like macho masculinity films and trans community like reception of it. I hit up Emmett for this because because I'm the most femme trans guy, so it's only natural that I'm talking about macho masculinity. Yes, this, and because you're the one trans guy I can talk about this in depth with on a film level.
True,
and two,
true.
I this past weekend I went up with one of my friends to Santa Cruz. John, if you're listening to this, you probably are, but at some point you're probably bullying me. I know it. But we were driving up to Santa Cruz to visit another one of our friends. And John just kept talking about Hardcore Henry, the movie.
Yes, Hardcore Henry.
Like, John is like a grip. So John works in the film industry. And Hardcore Henry's fascinating because it was made in Russia, so there's no safety. There are no union guidelines. Like people
Oh
did not have
no,
harnesses. Like
no OSHA.
no OSHA compliance whatsoever. Um, but we were talking about it, and like John was telling me, she was like, "Oh, like you need to have like a drop of testosterone to like enjoy this movie. Like you need to have something there. Like mind you, she's
This
trans
one.
femme. Like you need to have some testosterone in your body to enjoy this movie, not because it'll make you feel like it's a really bad film. Like the story's god awful. It's like Hardcore Henry. And then if you guys remember, I don't blame you. It's like a first person like movie, but it functions like the story functions a lot like a first person game with the same beats as a first person shooter. Meaning it has god awful writing. It has the worst writing imaginable. But like me and John talked about this movie for a good 2 hours of our drive. We talked about it for a while because there's also like a musician. This is listeners, it's gonna be a Hardcore Henry deep dive for 2 seconds. Basically, Hardcore Henry was made by this guy. It's like Ilya, his name's like Ilya Nicefoler or something like that. And he is the lead vocalist for this band called Fighting Elbows, which is
That's a
like
really great name.
It's a fucking great name. It's so I love it. Like it's like a Moscow based English speaking Russian man. I don't know. Like it's but they did a music video that's a lot like Hardcore Henry, and they're like, we should just make a fucking movie out of this. And then they did. And then they also made Nobody with Bob Odenkirk. I didn't realize it's the same fucking guys.
Wow, really? Because that's so interesting. I saw Nobody. I did not see Hardcore Henry, but I've seen so much like analysis of Hardcore Henry, and I think it's really interesting to examine within the camera, like. And I'll get into that, but continue please with your Hardcore Henry deep dive.
Yeah, so like it's the same guy that made Nobody, so it's like the same guy, and like some of the beats are this similar. Like there's a lot of similar things like that say a lot about the the people who made it, of their political ideology. Of they hate cops for one. They fucking hate cops. They love violence. They like, and then there's like both of their films, including them in actually in all three, in the music video Hardcore Henry and Nobody, there's an instance of a woman, the main character saving a woman from sexual assault. That happens in all three of the movies. I don't know what the fuck that pattern means, but like that, and that contributes to something. It's weird. Like it's almost like a power fantasy, I guess, of like being there to save a woman. I have no clue. I know in Hardcore Henry, I haven't seen Nobody. I watched part of it, but I couldn't, like, I just got bored. I just wasn't in the space to watch it. So, but in Hardcore Henry, like, it's saving the lady from the cops that are sexually assaulting her. That goes into like the cops are bad thing. I don't know. And they love drugs. That's the other part. They love drugs.
Yeah.
And if you take all of those, and then there's also like a little bit of misogyny where you like there's like the lead woman that's like kind of like her, like the main character is like girl, I guess, that you end up hating at the end. At least that's what happened in Hardcore Henry.
Gotcha.
I don't know if it happened in Nobody. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened in Nobody.
It's kind of hard to explain because Nobody was definitely like that kind of male power fantasy, but in a different way. It was more like geared towards like older male, and it from what I remember, it was more focused on the rebonding of the family and like proving yourself as the head of the household. I think that was much more present in Nobody, and I think it's interesting to compare it to films like like Die Hard, for example, which is definitely that to an extent where there's been so much analysis of Die Hard that, I mean, both in terms of like critical film theory, but also just in my life, I've seen so like I've written so much about Die Hard, guys.
I've
It's so those dynamics of like nuclear family, the guy having to reprove himself and reclaim his masculinity, and all of these themes.
Oh, definitely. I think like so much of like Die Hard is definitely like a movie I want to touch on in this discussion because
Yes.
like I've seen Die Hard so many times. Every like holiday season, I watch Die Hard. It's the one consistent tradition.
Yep. Because it's a Christmas movie.
It's a Christmas movie. And if you don't think it's a Christmas movie, then I don't know, get well soon, go to therapy, like get better. Enjoy life.
Seek help, just
general help. Like like have a little fun.
Yeah. Guys, come on. Let's Nightmare Before Christmas, we can debate whether or not that's a Christmas movie or a Halloween movie, but the Die Hard series, or at least the first one, that's a Christmas movie. Come on.
Isn't the second one also Christmas?
Probably. I've only seen the first one because I've only seen it within the context of like a cinema studies class. And then of course like during the holidays, but I haven't seen any of the other ones.
I feel like it's really fascinating. I guess even this goes outside of like transness, but into like consumption of like really masculine male media, because like Die Hard is about like that reclamation of like lost masculinity through globalization of like the American man gaining back. Fuck yeah, we're the men. We're the men.
The manifest destiny, going into the wild man, like going into the West and like reclaiming it and everything, or like going into like the wilderness. I've written a whole essay about this, but basically the way that they posit Nakatomi Plaza as this kind of like wild area, like there's a lot of like thick like plants, and obviously he's using a lot of like the resources around him to create his weapons and stuff, and he's very unfamiliar with this environment. So it's kind of like putting this like survival film within the context of an office. And so it's really funny because it's really funny to see him like walking across like glass and like doing all of these things that you would associate with like say like a predator type or like alien type scenario, but it's in an office. It's like an office, like a skyrise in Los Angeles. And so he's doing the most and really just like going full hog in this, even though it's just an office building, but because he's so not like he so doesn't fit into that world, it takes on this kind of different meaning and like harkens back to a lot of like westerns and like that sort of period of colonization of the West as well. So
yeah, and I think like with Die Hard, it's about like reclamation of masculinity and like all of that associated with cowboys and stuff.
yes.
But I've noticed, like at least in my family, like I grew up with all women. Like my mom, I grew up with my mom and my grandmother, and I would say my grandmother. This is like I've had a conversation with my mom about recently. My mom and I have both decided or like figured in any other universe, my grandmother's a lesbian. And like we think like we both have gotten that vibe. I didn't realize I wasn't the only one that thought that. But they both love Die Hard. And it's kind of really interesting seeing it like this movie that isn't meant for their respective audiences is like kind of like, I would say I haven't met bigger Die Hard fans or like more Like, because like Die Hard, a lot of people love Die Hard, but like my mom and my grandma will talk about Die Hard. Like they've seen all the movies
Hmm.
and they have opinions on all of them. um, they have opinions. So I've seen one and two. I haven't seen three or four.
They've
The
got
fifth
some
one.
they've got some diehard takes.
They got some Die Hard takes. They're Die Hard fans of Die Hard.
There you
Um,
go.
ba-da-dum. But it's kind of really interesting of how like these masculine movies get reappropriated in that stuff. Because also like even with Hardcore Henry, like my friend John, she's trans. Like she's like, this is like this is a masculine testosterone filled movie that I fucking love.
Hmm.
And I think like the only people that should watch these movies are trans people and like like women that are like on a queer little scale, like somewhere.
Just no cis men.
No cis men. Go watch whatever the fuck they watch.
Yeah. It's I feel that, and I think it's really interesting to posit Hardcore Henry as a trans fantasy because it's first person cinema as you said. And I've been talking about in my classes, specifically 106A, history of African, Asian, and Latin American film, which I highly recommend to any listeners out there. It's a great film analysis class. And it's upper div as well. So if you're ever looking for upper divs, it's always good. But we're talking about the camera and the inherent bias that the camera creates, and like the specifically the sort of character of the camera, right? And how we as the audience, as voyeurs, as kind of traced back in Laura Mulvey's essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, we are given this this power fantasy, right, through Hardcore Henry. And I think something, Hardcore Henry is somewhat marketed towards, a cis, like heterosexual male audience, but I think it's interesting to consider something like Laura Mulvey's like the male gaze, and kind of re repositioning it as the trans male gaze as something that's liberating, that's giving these communities power. I think that you can trace interpretations of like queer interpretations of cinema, and specifically uber macho, very commercialized cinema, like to stuff like Top Gun, obviously, like the
Oh
volleyball
my
scene,
god,
the
Top
very,
Gun.
very, very homoerotic volleyball scene that is echoed in Top Gun Maverick with a football scene. And it's really interesting. They actually have a mix of genders in that. So that's like a whole other
Okay,
like
that scene,
podcast.
that scene. Okay, let's talk about hardcore, not hardcore. Let's talk about Top Gun Maverick's football scene because there's a mix of genders, but it still comes out to being gay.
It really does.
like they were really like, oh yeah, like we're gonna mix up genders. We're adding a more like heterosexuality. We want straight people. Literally, I saw that movie like high, and
Oh,
I just
nice.
remember it being very gay and including that scene. I remember one of the characters had like a rash guard on. I'm like, why the fuck are you wearing a rash guard? Let me see them titties. Like, but like, why are you as a man wearing a rash guard? But
Show them. Come on.
yeah,
Please.
show them. Show the girls. Show the
Show
girls.
the girls.
I like how did they manage to like Top Gun? Like they have like Top Gun is just like Navy propaganda, but I think it's really funny of like if you take all the gay Navy jokes, like
Yeah,
it's so gay because it is the Navy. It is the
exactly.
Navy.
And like I mean, there's also like Miles Teller's character. I think his name is Rooster, and his one of his cohort. I think his name is Hangman. These aren't like the actual characters' like full names. These are the little like cutesy
Navy code names. I don't know anything. I don't know if this is like accurate to like the Navy and like the US Air Naval Force, but if it is, that's I don't know. It's a little fruity to be like, oh, your nickname is Rooster now, or your nickname is Hangman, and like all of these. I don't know. It's a little like drag names to me. But these two guys are very like they're posited as these very like heavy arch rivals within the film, and kind of in competition. And Hangman's always kind of like teasing Rooster, and then at the end they're the two that have to like Hangman's the one that saves Rooster's ass at the end, and like they have this kind of like very intense moment where they're like thank you for saving my life, and no problem. And it was just it was I was sitting there with my partner and thinking, and we were both saying like kiss, they've got a kiss, that this is like they are building towards a kiss. Like if this was like a gay film, they would have kissed. And I don't know, I feel like Top Gun definitely has some gayness, and I you could probably argue transness as well within its DNA as like an uber macho film. So I think that's like, yeah, I think the Top Gun series is definitely it's one for the LGBTs. If we're talking about like uber macho reclamations.
It's for it's for the US Navy and and gay people
And gay people
will not join the US Navy.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna take a little break for some tunes, but we'll be right back to talk about more masculine stuff in media. I'm gonna talk. I have some ideas because I've been reading some things about masculine insecurities. So
ideas.
Yeah.
Perverts and murderers and cops on TV, and I don't even mean to preach, cause what the fuck do I know? I may say that I don't, but I still miss those. Pretended we were schizos and hollering lyrics word for word, weren't Sonata's flow was sick, though, catching up the time behind
naturally no common man. I'm hotter than the beat, so just supernova in quadrant 10.
How you been?
Mind is like a mental prison, chained and shackled to the ceiling, tied and gagged with frontal baggage, but I'm chilling like a villain who plans on killing every chillin', depending on criminal riddance, all cause it's a good feeling.
Are you okay?
Cerebellum seems to be attacked, cerebral cortex is overloaded with poon and snatch. I seldom act upon logic, I screw honesty, disprove policy, trapped in a crude democracy.
Why do you feel this
Well, daddy
way?
left and mommy used to worse, to preach and curse about how I should be a nurse, because there is no happiness or end goal without a purse full of paper, plus it's safer to trust fund in the church.
The trouble, mister, we don't mean it, but I ain't finna talk. Fuck off with that subpoena. Stuck reminiscing, sticking pencils through the tape. Thinking shit, I got the brain and how to play. A nigga fucked the bitch, then I kicked her out my place. To get her off my dick, I just spray her down with mace. We got the jazz, the funk, calculate too fast. You punk, talking to math, not the baggage in the trunk.
Where did it all go wrong?
Like it was ever right, these words are hella tight. They've caused a hella fight to kept me up awake at night. The mind of a lobotomite, minute by minute, and get it worse than I ignore the signs. Undependent, remind me I forget it. Behind me are the credits, beside me got the Mackie legendary where I'm stepping. I'm scared to who faking, but to me I'm going crazy while the moon is flipping crescents.
I ain't crazy, 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 I ain't crazy.
Let the police come and smoke the stage. We're getting restless now and can no longer wait. And I know that you know for sure what it is you are having me endure. Take another step and then engage. Nobody here wants to die of old age. At least for now, while we're young and dumb. In a few years, what will we become? Fuck me, it doesn't matter. I cannot live like this. I cannot fucking live like this. My woman, I can't live without my woman. Live a lie, that's alright. I'll be there till the end of time. The end of time. Nothing so pure, I know it to be so. Momentum building up before it feels so blow. We got it right, nobody has the right to stay in one place this long without a fight. The lights are dimming and the future is on hold. I look for silver while I lie in bed with gold. And I say, fuck me, it doesn't matter. I cannot live like this. I cannot fucking live like this. My woman, I can't live without my woman. Live a
Welcome
We're
back. I
back.
hope you enjoyed the tunes.
Welcome.
Yeah, I would say like one thing this is reminding me of is a fanfic I've been reading.
Ooh,
But
yes.
like the fanfic, it's for this like it's for Disco Elysium, which I know, but my friend recommended it to me and it's really good. But like thematically, what it's about is about masculine insecurities. And
Mm.
like what does it mean to like be insecure in your masculinity and how queerness can play into that.
Well, that's a
And
very like trans theme, I feel like. I mean, for both sides, but especially for the trans like guy or masculine experience. Um, I think a lot of people who are listening who are trans masculine or trans masculine identified can relate to the feeling of, especially when like Calvin Guerra and like a lot of like trans meds and like the early sort of stages of like online trans activism and trans masculine circles, like the push for going for a sort of normalized version of masculinity, like the very, traditional, like trying to fit into that box. And I think that there's something to be said for reclaiming like an uber macho expression of that to like as a kind of like gender performance almost, and also just as like gender envy too.
yeah, and I would say like I think it's really interesting of like when it comes to like characters who may not necessarily in their own story have like transcoding in the sense of like whenever I think of like a very transcoded character of in canon, I think about Ash Williams,
Mhm.
like Ashley Joanna Williams, like from the Evil Dead. Like he's so transcoded, even though he's
Totally.
not explicitly trans. So that's like through name and through his relationship with like his family and other people. Like it's really obvious, but like with characters that don't necessarily have any coding to them at all, it's just they're kind of fruity or they're just wonky in their masculine appropriations. I've seen like really interesting interpretations of them like being trans characters. And I think like when it comes to, especially when it comes to like going into like discussions of like trans masculine people and the relationship with like masculinity, I've had like a really interesting experience of being like very insecure in my masculinity and then being again insecure in my masculinity, but insecure in the way of being too masculine and of appearing too masculine and
Yeah.
making other people uncomfortable. So it's in this interesting dynamic of a push and pull between these two sides.
Oh, totally. No, and that's such a like I feel both of those things very present like throughout at least my experience, and then of course you as well, as you said. And I think that a lot of transmasculine listeners can relate to that, like trying to find that expression of masculinity that's healthy and that fits within the expression that you want to have, but still having to kind of adhere to, or at least like trying to hit that balance and that performance again. I mean, gender is a performance to me. I think I'm the circus, but but I think that yeah, like that hitting that socially acceptable performance of gender, that's always something present within that experience. I was gonna say, I know you're a fan of Reanimator, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's definitely like I mean, horror film and like horror as a genre in general has definitely been kind of like like sort of co-opted by trans audiences and stuff. Do
Oh
you have
my
any
gosh.
sort of, I mean, I'm sure that you have so many perspectives on that, but
I recently wrote a paper on Videodrome
mm,
and like the transgender self, and I think I've talked about this in an episode before about Videodrome as a trans film. But like one perspective I fucking saw on Twitter of all places was like talking almost like what the transness in Videodrome is, of like someone was saying like if someone tweeted like, keep telling me about the parentheses probably accidental trans theming of Videodrome and the imagery that equates femininity and transcendence, and we're gonna end up like this, and it's like two characters like clothes, but like still the concept of like Videodrome's transness, like a lot of people have looked at it like, oh, he has a stomach pussy for VHSs.
Yeah.
Like he's trans. But it's also like the like I feel like it's like about like transcoding. It's about the push and pull of like femininity and masculinity. And like even like I'm trans masculine, I still like the reading of femininity as transcendence and having almost a more trans femme reading to Videodrome is really like, holy shit, yeah, that makes sense. And it's kind of interesting of like how both like segments of trans identities like can very fit together. Like I think there's a lot of divide of like, oh, trans mask perspective and trans femme, and then trans mask and trans femme being very separate and solitude. And there are differences, don't get me wrong, like
totally,
like I don't know like half of what goes into trans femme like healthcare. I don't know, because it's not my issue. The same way trans femmes typically don't know that much about trans mask healthcare. Like it's fair. But when it comes to like having opinions on media, like it's really interesting seeing like both sides come at the same thing and like coming to the same consensus of like this is transness. And
it just finding that sort of common ground of like, you see this as this way too, even if it's not in like the exact same way, right? It's still within the same kind of realm of like trans interpretation. I think that's really, it's almost like a community bonding thing. And you mentioned fan fiction earlier and like fandom. Oh my God, like that's like I could go on for ages about the presence of like fandom and fan works and fan interpretation as like the like ground zero for like reimagining and like trans lenses of cinema and various other things, like definitely. So I think that like it's definitely like that fandom sort of like that ritual of like going together for like a movie night. Even, I mean, you can trace that all the way back to like Rocky Horror Picture Show and like midnight movies and stuff like that. I think that's that community bonding through a different interpretation, one that's maybe not in the mainstream. I think that's trans.
Yeah, and I think like it's when you're talking about like fan interpretations, I kind of like it's kind of interesting to look at like who's fans of what media of what I'll commonly see, because like I've seen a lot of like trans mask, like a lot of trans mask people I know like got into Top Gun or whatever, and I'm like, oh, of course you did. But then seeing even like when it comes to like over the summer I went to go see Nightbreed, which is a Clive Barker film, and Clive Barker was there speaking because it's for Outfest. And Clive Barker, I went there with our friend Luca. Luca, if you're listening to this, I know. But Luca is a big fan of Clive Barker, but like has a really interesting relationship with Clive Barker just because he's put out transphobic work, especially towards like trans femme people, and like he kind of sucks. He's kind of a cis gay man. So but it was really interesting seeing the audience, because there was a lot of cis gay men going to see Nightbreed, because it's like Nightbreed is allegorically about queerness in a cis heteronormative society. But like there was cis gay men, and then there was like some gender fucky bitches. And I was more with the gender fucky bitches, but it was like really interesting of seeing like even within a queer, overarching queer like space, like the divide there of like
Yes.
I have no clue how those people are watching like what is it, like Hellraiser. Like I don't want to know their new Hellraiser opinions where like Pinhead is a trans woman. Like I'm sure they have opinions, but
Yeah.
I don't know, it still was like fun. And I think, gosh, now I want to talk about horror. That'll be another episode. Halloween.
Yes.
Halloween.
Yeah, we got to get a
Halloween.
Halloween episode in here.
Halloween episode. I should do round table with the girlies.
Yes.
Let's talk about horror movies. But it's really interesting, I guess, of how some people have the same, like different groups have the same relationship, like different relationships with the same piece of like gay men love Top Gun, but then also gay trans men love Top Gun. Like it's specifically gay trans men I know that love Top Gun.
Yeah.
Or even
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and even like with horror, like Scream. And like the two guys in Scream. I don't give a shit about Scream, but by God, I have seen, is it Billy and Stu?
Yeah.
I've seen their asses all over Tumblr being gay as fuck, and all the like people that are doing that are like gay trans men. I'm like, this is great.
There's a similar phenomenon with Bill and Ted, which I put in my notes here. And like the reading of Ted as this sort of trans icon, as well as Keanu Reeves. And I don't know if this is a universal experience. Please, stop me if I'm wrong here. Listeners, feel free to, argue against this, but I feel like he's definitely a target of gender envy for trans masculine guys because of the way that he expresses his masculinity. And it's almost variable depending on what film you're looking at. Obviously, Keanu Reeves's expression of gender is going to be way different in the Matrix, in compared to Bill and Ted. But I feel like, he definitely runs in these sort of circles of films that have been either reclaimed. So I'd say Bill and Ted, for example, by the sort of LGBT community, and specifically trans communities, and then films that are definitely like explicitly have trans interpretations, confirmed canon, as with the Matrix and the whole Neo storyline and everything.
It reminds me of going to like Bill and Ted. It reminds me of like a lot of you mentioned about Ted being like kind of the object of gender envy, but I've seen a lot of white trans guys, like of a specific type, really liking Bill.
Yes.
And also just Alex Winter, even into like Lost Boys.
Totally.
Of, like him in that elfish type look to him. He looks like an elf. I'm sorry, Alex Winter. I'm sorry, Alex Winter. You look very trans in an elf sort of way. But it's really interesting looking at Keanu and like gender envy with Keanu, just because like I've known like I guess it kind of goes into like I was talking about like my first episode of this season is like trans mixedness and how like race and like transness kind of have a similar existing outside of a binary of race. And like Keanu, like I've met people that didn't know Keanu was mixed. They thought he was just white, and I was like, you're kidding. His name's Keanu.
Yeah.
His name's fucking Keanu. Just he's like some white guy. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But just kind of like the mix, like the malleability, the like ability to be changed and like viewed differently in different lights is kind of goes into that like transness. So I think there's definitely something to be said about Keanu being very trans iconic. But yeah, I've seen like both of them get like so like transgendered and like also like viewing them as T for T, like
Yes.
it's so good. Like I can't imagine watching Bill and Ted in any other way.
It makes the series a lot more interesting because they as you know within the series they're very transgressive, right? They transgress against the expectations that their family has for them. They're not, they're popular somewhat but not really. They're kind of considered like these social menaces and these kind of like deadbeat figures, but they're the ones who go, back in time, who have these incredible conversations with Socrates and all of these, all of these different figures of history that are considered very great. I think it's interesting to read them in that light of like, they're messing with history in a way, right? They are they are introducing modern historical concepts to ancient historical figures, or not modern concepts to ancient historical figures. And I think that is kind of an act that can be paralleled to the act of fandom, of introducing these identities that have always been here. Don't get me wrong, but modern interpretations that of these characters as these identities. I think that's really interesting. I also want to mention that Alex Winters is in this film called Freaked. It's a late 90s film. And I first off highly recommend it. It's amazing practical effects, really fast-paced comedy. If you're into those things, please go check it out. It's just a visual treat. I think it's free on YouTube as well, so you can just search Freaked, Alex Winters, it'll pop up. I'm 99.9% certain. And this film is really interesting because in the film, Alex Winters, the whole storyline is that his character gets turned into a half monster, and he's with all of these other monsters on this in this circus. And they all have these very, elaborate sort of practical effects things going on. And I think it's really interesting how they kind of these monsters kind of like band together, and there's this like very clear identity as a freak. And it's also really interesting because two of the characters get fused together. It's this girl and this boy, and so there's also this really interesting exploration of like gender dynamics there and like queerness. And so I don't know, I think that's probably a longer episode at some point to go over, but I think that that's another work that's really interesting that stars Alex Winters and Keanu Reeves as Ortiz the dog boy, but he's not credited in that role. I think that's really interesting. So you really don't realize it's him until like the end, and you're like, oh, he was in this.
I've yet to see Freaked, but I was looking at Alex Winters' like filmography, and he was in the Ben 10 movies and the Smosh movie. That's do with that what you will.
Interesting choices.
But the plot of Freaked almost really reminds me of Nightbreed, because Nightbreed is about this it's the film by Clive Barker, and it's very like explicitly queer coded. Like he's talked about the queerness in that film in interviews. He talked about it. Oh my god, that's funny. I'll talk about my experience with Clive Barker in a second, but the film is about this guy that has reoccurring dreams of this place. And he goes to like a psychiatrist about it, and his psychiatrist is evil. His psychiatrist is also played by David Cronenberg.
Ooh, interesting.
Like David Cronenberg is an actor in this film, and honestly, he's the best actor in this film.
Yeah.
But you can't look at him without being like, oh my god, David. but he is evil, and basically the guy has a girlfriend. The guy ends up dying somehow, but then he's like kind of almost brought back with powers, making him a night breed, which is like these monsters, and basically all these people that dream of this place where all the night breed are find their way there. And it's kind of like an enclave of these monsters. People have powers in some way, but they're like in isolation underground, like they're hidden. So it's like a hidden like society. And basically David Cronenberg's character wants to kill them all just for the sake of killing them all. Because he's a serial killer and he's like, this is the biggest thing I could do. And he gets like local law enforcement involved, and it's like kind of about like social persecution of like queer people and like queer community. And that kind of reminds me of like Greekwood like turning into like a monster, because it's like the main character is like straight throughout the entire movie. So you'd be like, how the fuck is like they're really straight? How is this a queer film? But it's like more allegorical in that like becoming a monster and having to like I would argue like he like the main character of Nightbreed is more trans, because he's like becomes this guy who looks normal on the outside, almost like a stealth trans guy. Like he looks like a normal human being. She's just like, why can't I have him back? But his monster form is like deeply monstrous, like ugh.
Yeah.
But she still loves him despite it. So it's almost like a trans, like I would say she's like cis, but no, she gets transed up in the end. So it's T for T. It's T for T with like a lot of steps. There's many steps in between there. But yeah, it kind of reminds me of Nightbreed. It's a really interesting film. I don't think we'll ever get a trans interpretation out of Clive Barker, because I don't think he knows that trans people exist. Or if he does, he's like, ew.
Oh God. Yeah. No, that's the thing is I think that what's so important about like fan works and fan interpretation and cinema studies in general is like it allows these interpretations to exist and to have legitimacy, as much as legitimacy is like, I mean, what does legitimacy mean, right? That's such a nebulous concept, but it allows for these interpretations at least to exist and be popularized through circles, and to have that is so, I think, vital, especially in a world that doesn't accept trans people fully yet, that to be able to find yourself in a piece of media that may not necessarily be made with you in mind, but to find that sort of camaraderie and that gender, that love of that, I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think it's like really special and really important. Of like, it doesn't really matter what the creators have to say about shit. Like Anne Rice can say whatever the fuck she wants. Clive Barker can say whatever the fuck they want. Like what he wants. Like it's all about like the community that like trans, like with media. And I think like I would argue, like you've been taught this in your like writing classes, like you write not for yourself, you write for your audience. Is when it comes to like films and stuff, and all the things you create are for an audience. So at some point you lose authority on what you can say about your film or your piece of media, because it's no longer really yours. You lose by like almost publishing it, or by like putting it out for mass consumption. You lose any hold you do to be the voice of God in the sense.
Yeah, a friend of mine told me this quote that was really interesting on film, about how when you're watching films, you're the director in a way, right? Your consciousness, the audience's consciousness is the one directing the film, because it's their interpretation and ultimately their opinion at their perception of that audio and that video that you've put together that creates the film, that gives the film life. And you've created it to an extent as a director, as a writer, as as any part of the film industry, right? But there's something to be said for the power of the audience, and specifically of their interpretation, and how vital that is to creating the film within a popular consciousness. And we are nothing without the people that we perform to, right?
Exactly.
They are so they are so vital to what we do as filmmakers. So yeah.
That's really beautiful, and I think like it's really something like to be like very conscious of when you're both creating and consuming work, of just knowing that like your relationship with the film isn't necessarily like a relationship to a piece of media, either as the creator or as like a consumer. Like you're on equal playing fields almost. Like it's a very like symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
And I think
It's like the perfect word for it.
Yeah, it's very symbiotic. Like one does not exist without the other. And so when it comes to like arguments of like, oh, is this queer, is this trans, and people are like, oh, this isn't denying something to like your interpretation, it's like complete bullshit. 'Cause it's like, no, it is to you, and that's what's important.
Yes.
Like there's several films where it's like, this is blank.
And that's why we love Johnny Knoxville, because he
owns up to the queerness.
Owns up to it. He is like, yes.
I want to meet Johnny Knoxville so bad. I want to go to like Hot Dog on a Stick and buy a family pack with him and share it with him. Like I want to have like a kind of terrible time. Like it'd be great.
Side note, did you know that Hot Dog on a Stick has like beer now? Like they sell like
ale. What?
Like they have
Hot Dog on a Stick has beer now?
I was at Trader Joe's the other day. I have to tell you this, dear listeners. They have like a stout, like
a brand.
I don't know, like IPA brew now. That's Hot Dog on a Stick. It's like lemonade supposed to be, or something like that. I haven't tried it yet. I brought it to
try it.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to drink it. I have gastrointestinal problems I won't go into here, but right at the moment, so I can't drink. But I am determined to try this, because I didn't even realize that Hot Dog on a Stick as a brand was like still around and successful enough to have its own beer, like its own artisanal beer.
We need to try this. For Jackass, we will be drinking. Our Jackass viewing will be sponsored by Hot Dog on a Stick's beer.
Literally.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think it's really fitting that we end talking about Johnny Knoxville, because hopefully Johnny Knoxville will come up sooner. Not him, he's not going to be here, but we're going to talk about him. He's going to be
could
the
invite
lead.
him here. Like, you know how the Queen like would sometimes show up to weddings uninvited, which kind of is like, I don't know, like if my Aunt May does that, it's not cool, but if the Queen does it, it's suddenly okay. I don't know, but I think that we could send out an invitation to him and see if he responds. I highly doubt he will, but
we should do that.
I think miracles. I believe in miracles.
I believe in miracles too, and I want to see this happen. I want him, like when we do, I want to invite him so bad. This is our goal. This is our goal, listeners. With your financial support, we do not have a Venmo, we don't have anything, but with your financial support, we can get Johnny Knoxville here.
Viewers, if you have any connection to Johnny Knoxville, please let us know, and please hit him up and tell him that two trans guys want to interview him.
Two trans guys just want to talk to him. We'll invite him to a hot dog on a stick. We can drink the beer with him.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, Emmett, this was a wonderful episode. It was great talking to you.
Oh, shucks. Well, I am so happy to be here always, and hopefully we'll be back later on. I got senior year craziness, but I really love this podcast, as you all know, and I love talking about trans interpretations of media and everything. Also, if the listeners, interpreters, audience, if they would like to read an essay about hegemonic or toxic masculinity and the effects of media on urban scape culture from 2019, English Comp 3. I have an essay on that relates to Jackass specifically. If you'd like to read that, feel free to hit me up on my Instagram. I'll send you a link, send you a PDF.
We should put it on the link tree we have.
Yeah, it's prep for the next Jackass episodes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so
We're giving
excited.
you homework now.
Homework. We have homework too. Trust me, you're not alone in the homework listening. We have to watch them.
We have to watch them first. My essay primarily concerns the roots of Jackass in Big Brother, but that's
great.
That's a whole other thing.
But yeah, thank you, listeners. See you again next Wednesday for another episode of T Voice Swag. Do I know what it's going to be about? Fuck no, you'll find out. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Adios.
Adios.